It was a cold and rainy night, and Leo was sitting alone in his wooden house in the countryside, with only his dog and the sound of thunder around him when he heard something outside, something strange, something not like the usual wind or storm. Sounds, it was soft and heavy like a body falling in the mud, and it made him stand up quickly and rush to the door. He opened it, and the wind almost pushed him back, but he stepped forward and looked around. At first he saw nothing, just the usual wet grass, the trees shaking, and the storm going wild, but then he saw a glowing shape lying near the fence, something small, something curled up, and it was not moving. He ran to it without thinking, and his boots splashed in the muddy ground as he reached the shape and saw what it was. It was a girl, but not a normal one. Her skin was blue, not painted, not artificial. It was natural, and her hair was like silver threads, wet and stuck to her face, and her eyes were closed, and her lips were pale and trembling. She was freezing. Leo bent down and tried to lift her. She was light too, light like she had not eaten for days, and when he touched her she whispered something, but it was not English. It was not any language he knew, and still her voice made him feel something strange, something deep inside him, something like sadness and hope mixed together. He picked her up and carried her to the house while his dog barked nervously and kept looking at the sky inside the house. Leo wrapped her in a blanket and placed her near the fireplace. He gave her warm soup, but she could not drink. She was barely awake, and her skin looked like it was fading. Her veins were glowing faintly like soft light under the skin, and it scared him a little, but also made him more curious. He had never seen anything like her, never even in the news or the strange alien stories. Suddenly he heard a strange sound again. This time it came from above. He ran outside and saw a small ship flying away silently. No lights, no engines, just smooth and fast like a shadow in the sky, and he knew at that moment someone had left her there, someone who did not want her anymore, someone who gave up. Leo went back inside and looked at the girl. Her eyes opened slowly, and for a second they were glowing purple, then they turned back to a soft gray, and she tried to speak again, but her throat was dry. He gave her water and held her hand and said, "You are safe here. I will help you, I promise, even if I do not understand who you are." He tried calling the hospital, but stopped before pressing the number. He thought if they saw her, they would take her away. Maybe put her in a lab, maybe treat her like an object, not a person. So he did something strange. He picked up his phone and called someone else, someone who helped him when his dog had once been very sick. He called a vet. The vet was Dr. Maddie. She lived in the town nearby, and she was smart and kind and trusted Leo when he said, "Please come quickly. I found a hurt girl and I cannot explain more over the phone. Please just trust me and come with your equipment and warmth." Maddie arrived 30 minutes later with her medical bag and flashlight, and when she saw the girl, her mouth opened in shock. She looked at Leo and asked, "What is this?" And he said, "I do not know, but she needs help, and you are the only one I can trust." Maddie touched the girl's skin and said, "This is not human." "Leo, are you sure this is safe?" And he said, "I am not sure about anything, but look at her. She is scared, she is weak, and she is alive." Maddie began checking her heartbeat, her eyes, her temperature, and everything was wrong. Her heartbeat was too fast, then too slow. Her skin was too cold, then too warm. Her breathing was shallow, and yet she was stable somehow. And then Maddie said something very strange. She said, "Leo, her body is changing, like adapting to our atmosphere." The girl opened her eyes again, and this time she looked at Maddie and whispered one word, "Help," and then closed her eyes again. Leo felt something in his chest, a strange connection, as if this moment was more important than he knew. And outside the rain was still falling, and the ship that left her was now gone into the stars, but something had started something that would change everything. And the night stayed silent except for the soft breathing of the alien girl, now resting near a fire with two humans ready to fight for her, even if they did not understand why yet. Dr. Maddie stared at the girl wrapped in thick blankets, lying on the small couch near the fireplace, while the sound of the storm faded outside, and the silence inside grew heavier every second as the strange glow from the girl's veins pulsed slowly like a weak signal fighting to stay alive. She touched the girl's wrist again and felt no pulse, but when she moved the stethoscope to her chest, she heard something like a heartbeat, but not the same as any human she had treated. It was like a soft hum followed by a pause, and then another hum repeating in a rhythm that made no sense to her, but somehow it was keeping the girl alive. Leo sat nearby watching Maddie with worry in his eyes, not sure if he had done the right thing, but knowing he could not let that girl die Alone in the rain, he kept remembering her whisper, that single word help, and it echoed in his mind over and over like a promise he had made without speaking. Maddie pulled out her thermal scanner and ran it over the girl's body, and the screen flashed. With strange colors, nothing like the usual red or blue. It showed waves of green and violet and a pulse point on her neck that flickered like a tiny star trying to survive. She turned to Leo and said, "This is not science, this is something else entirely. This girl is not just alien, she is changing every moment like her. Body is adjusting to being here, to breathing our air, to the gravity, to the heat of the fire, like she is fighting to stay with us." Leo nodded slowly and said she tried to speak again. "Before you came," and her voice was soft but real, and it made me feel something deep, like she is more than a visitor. Maybe she was born to be here. Maybe someone tried to stop her from being what she was meant to become. Maddie opened her bag and pulled out emergency nutrients and fluids with basic injectors and said, "I do not know if this will help or harm her, but doing nothing will not save her, so we try and we hope she wants to live." She inserted the injector carefully into the girl's arm, where the skin felt soft and not too alien, and pressed the button and watched as the fluid entered her system. The glow in her veins pulsed stronger for a second, then faded again, and for a moment, the girl's eyes opened just slightly, and she looked at Maddie, then at Leo, and her lips moved again. No sound came out, but Maddie read the shape of the words, and it looked like the same word, help, and maybe another word too, like warm or safe. But before she could ask, the girl closed her eyes again and drifted into sleep, or maybe something deeper. Outside, the wind picked up again, and a strange clicking sound echoed in the sky, not like thunder, but like something mechanical, something watching from above. And neither Maddie nor Leo noticed the small dark dot blinking in the tree across the house, a drone hidden under the leaves. Its lens focused on the girl's face. Back inside, Maddie connected her tablet to a private offline database and tried to find anything that matched the girl's vitals, but every search ended in error. Unknown life form system cannot identify, please try again. And she looked at Leo and said, "If we take her to any hospital, they will lock her up and study her like a test subject, and that is if they do not panic and do worse." Leo said, "Then we keep her here and we protect her, because whatever she is, she came to us and she did not harm us. She is alone and someone left her to die, and I will not be part of that. I will not be like them." Maddie agreed and said, "We need to keep her warm, fed, and safe until we understand more, and we also need to prepare, because if someone left her, they might come back and they might not want her to survive." The fire crackled softly and the girl's body seemed to relax more with each passing hour, her breathing steady, her face calm and peaceful, and a faint smile appeared on her lips, like she was dreaming of something better, something brighter. Leo brought an old blanket from his mother's room, the one she used when he was a child, and gently placed it over the girl and whispered, "You are not alone anymore, and we will not let anyone hurt you again." In the shadows outside, the drone sent a signal, a silent alert to a ship far away in orbit, and the message was simple: subject still alive, humans involved, await further orders. And the stars above shimmered like eyes watching, waiting, judging. Inside the small house, three beings from two worlds sat in silence, each bound by a moment that none of them fully understood, but all knew was only the beginning of something much greater than they had ever imagined. The night stretched long and the sky turned darker, as if hiding secrets behind its quiet cover, while Leo stayed near the girl, never moving far from her side, as Maddie typed silently on her tablet, trying to record every strange detail without alerting the world to what they had discovered inside this little cabin that had now become something more than a home. The girl named Jara, though they did not know her name, yet breathed softly under the old blanket, her body warmer, her veins glowing gently like calm waves on a silent sea, while the storm outside had finally faded into a distant whisper, as if the sky itself wanted to listen to what would happen next. Inside the trees just beyond the cabin, where moonlight barely touched the ground, a blinking red light flashed once and then vanished, and a small silver insect, like machine the size of a hand, crawled down from the highest branch and began moving closer with quiet steps, like a hunter with no heartbeat and no fear. It moved with purpose, its lens fixed on the cabin walls, its sensors focused on the life form inside and far above in orbit. A ship received each signal and fed it into A system that judged only in terms of value and cost and survival and failure, and the words that blinked across the screen were subject not terminated human interference detected observation required. Leo leaned back in his chair near the fire, eyes tired but open, thoughts spinning like a slow storm in his mind, remembering the way the girl had whispered help and remembering the strange moment when her fingers had curled around his arm, like she knew him, like something inside her was searching for something that only he could give. Maddie stepped away from the corner and said quietly, "Leo, something happened when she touched you last night. Did you feel anything strange, any heat or sound or change?" And Leo looked at his hand and said, "I did not at first, but now there is this mark," and he rolled up his sleeve to show her the soft, faint glow now running across his wrist like a line of light drawn by something not human. Maddie stared at it and said, "That was not there yesterday." And Leo nodded and said, "It does not hurt, it just feels like it is alive, sometimes like it knows something I do not." And Maddie reached out to scan it with her device, but the screen froze and blinked and shut down before she could get a reading, and her face turned pale as she said, "This thing is reacting to her. It is like you are connected." Before they could say more, Jera stirred under the blanket and her lips moved without sound, and then slowly she opened her eyes, and they were no longer gray or purple but something deeper, something with layers like liquid metal mixed with starlight. And she looked at Leo and whispered one word again, this time clearer, "safe," and then her gaze shifted to Maddie and she said, "Thank you," in a voice small but steady. Leo stepped forward and said, "Do you understand me? Can you speak more?" And Jera nodded weakly and said, "More coming, danger near, must hide," and her eyes rolled back as her body trembled and the glow in her veins began to flicker like a signal under attack, and Leo caught her before she could fall outside. The small silver drone crept up the side of the wall and reached the window, where its lens adjusted focus and captured the image of Jera and Leo together and sent the data upward, where a decision was made and the ship began to move slowly toward the edge of Earth's sky. Waiting for the right moment back inside, Maddie rushed to prepare another nutrient dose while Leo tried to wake Jera, gently whispering her name, even though he was not sure if it was really her name, just something he felt when he looked at her. Like the word was already part of his memory, waiting to be spoken. Jera's eyes opened again for a brief second, and she touched Leo's hand and whispered the word "trap," and then the cabin lights flickered and the air grew cold as if the walls themselves were breathing with fear, and the windows showed no reflection, only dark space as the power flickered again, and then returned. Maddie stood and said, "I think we are not alone anymore. Something is watching us, something close," and Leo picked up his flashlight and opened the door, slowly scanning the trees and the fields. But there was nothing visible, no sound, no movement, just the stillness of something hiding too well. He turned back and said, "We need to move her, maybe to the basement. Maybe somewhere they cannot track," and Maddie agreed, and together they lifted Jera carefully and carried her down the wooden steps into the hidden room below the floor, where old tools and boxes sat unused for years, and where, maybe, just maybe, they could buy a little more time. As they settled her down, Jera whispered something neither of them understood, a sentence in her native language, soft and full of pain and hope, and then she closed her eyes and slept again, breathing slow and deep as the glow in her skin returned slowly up in the trees. The drone clicked once more and vanished into the sky, and the ship above began to lower its shields and prepare for descent, because now they knew the girl had awakened and her connection to the human was stronger than expected. The morning came with heavy clouds, and no birds sang around the cabin, as if nature itself knew something was wrong. Something not welcome had entered the sky, and the wind carried no warmth, only a quiet warning that no one could explain. Leo stood near the window watching the fields while holding a hot cup in his hands, trying to calm the storm inside his chest, the storm that started the moment he saw Jera in the rain, broken and lost and barely alive. And now she was down in the basement, breathing slowly, her glow returning little by little, as if the earth was healing her in ways unknown to science or reason. Maddie had not slept. She was reading every book, every article, every note she had ever saved about strange cases, about unknown biology, about things that science rejected and still whispered about in old journals. She had started to believe that Jera was not just a visitor, but maybe something more, something forgotten or hidden or Created in secret, the ground outside trembled for 1 second, then stopped so small that only Leo felt it through his boots, and he looked at the sky and saw something shimmer, something invisible bending the light above the trees like a ripple in glass, and he knew they were back. Whoever they were, whatever they were, they had returned. He ran down to the basement and found Maddie adjusting Jera's blanket, and he said, "We have to be ready, they are here," and she did not ask who because her hands were already shaking, her heart already racing. She believed him without needing proof, and that was enough. Jera opened her eyes slowly and whispered, "Danger near cold mines, no heart," and her voice cracked with fear. Her hands clutched the blanket as her body shivered, not from cold but from memory. Leo helped her sit up and said, "We will not let them take you. We will fight. We will hide. We will do whatever it takes." And Jera looked into his eyes and said, "They do not want me. They want silence. They want to erase the truth, and I am the truth." Outside, a ship began to appear piece by piece as its cloak faded, a sleek vessel, black and silver, with no sound, no lights, only presence, and it landed without a whisper near the cabin, its doors opening like the petals of a flower, but with none of the beauty, only purpose, and two figures stepped out, tall, thin, with skin like glass and eyes that glowed red, not from light but from command. They walked to the door without pause, without fear, and they knocked once, a sound so soft it should have been harmless, but it echoed through the house like thunder, and Leo opened the door slowly, holding an old hunting rifle, not for defense but for courage, and he said, "What do you want?" One of them spoke not with mouth but with thought, words entering his head, clear and cold, and the message was simple: hand over the subject. "She is defective. Her presence violates the agreement. She must be removed." Leo said, "She is not defective. She is alive. She is healing." And the voice replied, "She was never meant to survive. She was an error, a failed design. She was left because she is dangerous, not to you, but to them, to the order that must remain." Maddie came upstairs and stood beside Leo, her hands clenched and her voice firm, and she said, "She is a person, not a project. She has feelings. She speaks, she remembers, and that means she matters." And the figures looked at her without emotion and said, "Your kind always confuse function with worth. Her value was measured and found lacking. Your defense of her changes nothing." Jera stepped into the room, her legs weak but steady, her eyes glowing bright with the light of something deeper than fear, and she said, "If I am a mistake, then why do I feel this? Why do I dream? Why do I cry? Why do I want to live?" And the figures did not answer. They only raised their arms, and a soft pulse began to build, a hum that shook the walls and made the lights flicker. Leo stepped in front of Jera, arms wide, and said, "Then you will have to go through me." And Maddie stood beside him and said, "And me too." And for the first time, the figures hesitated, not because of fear but confusion, because no data had predicted this outcome. Humans protecting the unwanted, the discarded, the forgotten. The pulse stopped, the hum faded, and the figures spoke again, "Surrender her, and no harm comes to your world. Resist, and earth becomes part of the cleansing." And Leo said, "Then do your worst, because we are not afraid." And Jera whispered one word, "Enough." Her hands rose, and the glow spread through the room, and a wave of light burst outward, not violent but full of memory and feeling, and the figures stumbled as the wave passed through them, not burning but showing them every thought, every pain, every hope she carried, and they fell back like shadows, losing their form. The cabin was silent again after the ship disappeared into the clouds, but something had changed in the air, something deep and heavy, like the world had taken a long breath and now waited to see what would happen next. While Leo sat on the floor, holding Jera gently as she rested her head against his chest, her eyes closed but her mind still moving like waves in a wide sea. Maddie sat nearby, watching the slow rhythm of Jera's breathing, feeling her own heart calm for the first time in hours, but still unsure what would come next, still wondering how a girl from the stars could make her feel like they were all part of the same story, written in a language they were just beginning to understand. The fire crackled softly, throwing warm light across the wooden walls, and the small room seemed safe again for now, but Leo could feel something different inside Jera, something stronger than before, as if a door had opened inside her mind and old pieces were beginning to fit together. Slowly and painful, as Jera stirred and opened her eyes, and this time they were not confused or afraid, they were clear and focused. And she looked around the room with new awareness, her voice soft but steady as she said, "I remember now, not all, but Enough to know why they want me gone and why I must stay. Leo leaned closer and asked, "What do you remember?" And Jera looked at him with eyes that shimmered like silver water under moonlight, and she said, "I was made, not born. I was created by minds." That feared feeling they wanted a perfect messenger between their kind and others, one who could learn and speak and calculate but not feel, but I felt from the start, and they called it corruption. They said I was broken. Maddie listened without speaking. As Jera continued, her words slow, but certain, like a song once forgotten, now sung again. She said, "They tried to erase my emotions, they rewrote my code over and over, but something stayed. Something small and bright, like a flame, and I hid it deep, where they could not reach, and that flame grew and became memory, and memory became dream." Leo asked, "Why did they bring you here?" And Jera touched her chest and said, "Earth was a test, a place where emotions run wild and deep. They wanted to see if I could survive without becoming like you, but when I arrived I felt everything so strong, the light, the sound, the kindness, the fear, and I chose to keep feeling, and that made me dangerous to them." Maddie moved closer and said, "But you are not dangerous. Jera, you are kind and brave and smart." And Jera smiled gently and said, "That is why I scare them, because one choose my own path, not theirs, and now they cannot control me, and that means they might not control others like me if they ever exist." Leo held her hand and said, "Then we help you stay free. We protect you because you are not alone anymore." And Jera looked at him and said, "I know. I feel it now, like your touch unlocked something old inside me, something familiar and warm, and when I touched your hand I saw stars and oceans and trees and faces, and I think you are part of me in a way I do not understand yet." Outside, the wind whispered through the trees and the clouds moved slowly across the sky, as if giving space for something important, something sacred to unfold. Within the little cabin, hidden far from noise and fears, Hera stood slowly, her legs still weak, but her back straight and her eyes steady, and she walked to the mirror on the wall and looked at her reflection and said, "I never saw myself before, not truly. I was always a project, always watched, never allowed to wonder who I could be. But now I see not just a body, not just a tool, but a girl with a soul and a name and a choice." Leo smiled and said, "Then choose to live. Jera, choose to stay, choose to grow." And Jera turned to him and said, "I already did the night you found me, the night I saw your eyes and heard your voice and felt your arms lift me from the cold. I chose life, and I chose you." Maddie stood and wiped a tear from her cheek and said, "We cannot change what they did to you, but we can give you a place to begin again." And Jera nodded and said, "Then let this be my first day, not as an experiment, not as an error, but as someone real, someone who matters." The cabin seemed brighter, the fire warmer, the air filled with something new, something hopeful, and the glow in Jera's veins pulsed gently like a heartbeat, not just hers, but shared between them like a rhythm of trust. Far above the clouds in the shadow of orbit, the watchers still hovered, silent and still, but the data they received now confused them. The subject had not broken, had not run, had not attacked. Instead, she had bonded, adapted, and remembered, and that changed everything inside the cabin. Jera closed her eyes for a moment and whispered, "Thank you, not to Leo, not to Maddie, not to the stars, but to the piece of herself she had once lost, and now found again in the warmth of strangers who became family." The sky turned strange that morning, with no birds in the air and no wind in the trees, and the light from the sun felt cold, as if something had slipped into the world without asking for permission, as if something old and cruel had crossed a line that should never be crossed. Jera felt it first, her body tensing, her eyes glowing brighter, her breath catching in her throat as she stood near the window of the cabin, her hand pressed against the glass, her voice low and calm as she said, "They sent him, they sent the hunter. He is near, he is not like the others, he does not speak, he does not listen, he only ends." Leo looked at her, his hand already reaching for the small bag of tools and gear he kept near the door. Not weapons, but strong lights, old comes sharp blades, and Maddie grabbed her own pack filled with medical supplies and small scanners. None of them were soldiers, none of them trained for battle, but their hearts held something more stubborn than fear, something stronger than surrender. The trees outside began to shake, not with wind, but with footsteps too heavy for deer, too slow for machines. Something moved through the forest with purpose and silence. And Leo stepped onto the porch, his eyes scanning the woods, while Jera stood behind him, her glow now pulsing faster, like her body knew danger before her mind could explain. Ida Branch cracked and a shape appeared between the trees, tall and wide, with skin like burnt iron and no face. Only a mask with 3 dark lines like scars and a single red light in the center where eyes should be, and it stepped forward without sound, without pause, without... Karashera whispered his name, not in English, not in any human tongue, but it filled the air with dread, with memory, with stories never written because those who knew them never lived to tell them, and she said he was built to finish what others failed to erase, not just life, but truth. Leo shouted stop, but the hunter kept coming, and Maddie activated a small drone that flew into the air, sending a signal to scramble tracking, but the hunter raised one arm and fired a beam of cold blue energy that sliced through the air and destroyed the drone in a blink, and then kept walking. They ran back inside and bolted the doors, knowing it would not stop him, but hoping to buy seconds, not minutes, just seconds, to think, to move, to act. And Jera turned to Leo, her hand on his chest, and said, I can hide, but he will find me. You must not stay with me. He will hurt you. He does not know mercy. Leo looked into her eyes and said, then we hurt him first. And Jera shook her head and said, no, we survive. That is the only way we win. The hunter reached the cabin and placed his hand on the door, and the wood began to burn, not with fire, but with sound, high and sharp like metal screaming, and the door melted away, and he stepped inside. Leo threw a flash grenade, and it exploded with white light and sharp noise, but the hunter did not stop. He walked through the light and grabbed Leo by the arm and threw him across the room like paper, and then turned to Jera. Maddie hit him with a stun baton, and he turned and hit her back with a force that knocked her into the wall, but Jera stood still, her hands glowing now with bright silver light, and she whispered words from her own world, words that made the hunter pause just for a second. That second was enough for Leo to stand again and tackle the hunter from behind, grabbing the red lens and smashing it with a tool from his belt, and the hunter roared, not with pain, but with rage, and threw Leo down against her. Stepped forward, her hands raised, her voice loud as she said, I am not a mistake. I am not your failure. I am not yours. And light burst from her chest, not heat, not fire, not energy, but memory waves of emotion crashing through the room like thunder. Without sound, the hunter froze, his body shaking, his mask cracking, his limbs twitching as if something inside was breaking, something deeper than metal, something older than code. He looked at Jera, and for the first time he stepped back, his weapon arm dropping, his head turning slightly as if confused, as if remembering something long buried, and he spoke one word, free, and then fell to the ground, still and silence. Hera collapsed, and Leo caught her, holding her close, his own body shaking, his breath shallow, his heart pounding like war drums, and Maddie crawled over her arm, broken, but her eyes clear and full of awe. They looked at the hunter's body and saw his chest light fading, his mask breaking, his core exposed and silent, and Jera whispered, he was not born, he was made like me, but without choice, and now he is gone. The cabin lay quiet once more, filled with the scent of smoke and the light of dawn and the weight of something heavy now lifted from their shoulders. Far above in orbit, the watchers saw the failure and said nothing, only shifted their eyes to new targets, new plans, new threats, but the girl they cast aside had survived again. Smoke floated through the broken windows of the cabin as the sun rose higher into the pale sky, and light poured across the wooden floor where the hunter's lifeless body rested like a fallen statue made from pain and silence and failed orders. And now the air felt different, like the world itself had seen something it never expected to see. Hera lay in Leo's arms, her eyes closed, her breath steady, her hands no longer glowing but warm and calm and quiet, like the storm inside her had ended, and now only peace remained in the space left behind. And Leo looked at her face and whispered her name, not in fear, not in panic, but with hope. Maddie sat beside them, her arm wrapped in cloth, her fingers shaking, but her eyes full of fire and pride and disbelief, and she said softly, I saw what you did, Jera. I saw how you stopped him, not with power, not with force, but with memory, with feeling, with something they thought you did not. How the Sierra opened her eyes and smiled weakly, her voice almost too soft to hear, as she said, I remembered who I was, not what they made me, not what they tried to erase, but the pieces. I kept the parts I hid, the sparks of me they could not touch, and that was enough. Leo helped her sit up and said, you are more than enough. You are the reason we are still here. And Jera nodded slowly and looked at the hunter one last time and said, he was not evil, he was empty. They built him without choice, without a name, without a dream, and I gave him one moment of truth, and that was all he needed. The ground trembled again, not from steps, not from ships, but from something deeper, something older, like the earth had heard everything and now wanted to answer, and far above the clouds, the watchers on the ship felt it too, their screens flashing with new data, their minds unable to calculate why one discarded girl had broken every rule and changed every outcome. They sent a message not to Jera, not to Maddie, but to the leaders of their world. A message that said subject, active subject, protected subject, reborn, and they waited for an answer, but no answer came because the ones who gave orders now had no words to speak. Sarah stood with Leo's help and walked outside into the light, her bare feet touching the wet grass, her eyes lifting to the sky, and for the first time she did not feel fear or weakness or shame. She felt strong, she felt real, she felt alive. Birds began to return, flying over the trees, singing their morning songs. And the wind came back soft and warm and full of scent and sound, and the sky looked brighter than it had in days, like it had been waiting for her, like the world had been holding its breath, just to see if she would rise. Maddie followed her outside. Her broken arm held close, her eyes blinking in the sunlight, and she said, "What now? What do we do with everything we know, with everything we saw?" And Jera turned to her and said, "We share it not with anger, not with hate, not with blame, but with truth. We tell the world not just what they did to me, but what I chose to become." Leo smiled and said, "We tell them a story not of war, not of fear, but of one girl who was made to be quiet and chose to speak, who was built to be alone and chose to love, who was sent to disappear and chose to shine." And Jera laughed and said, "Then let that be the story they remember." News spread fast, not through official channels, not through orders or broadcasts, but through voices, through whispers, through messages passed hand to hand, screen to screen, heart to heart, and the world listened not because they were told, but because they wanted to know. They saw her face and heard her voice and watched her speak with peace, not with revenge, and people gathered in cities and villages and farms and oceans and said her name, Jera, the spark, the survivor, the one they threw away, and the one who saved everything. Children wrote her name in books and on walls and in songs, and parents told her story at night, and old people remembered how they once believed hope was just a word and now saw it living and breathing and walking on 2 feet with a voice that could never be silenced. Again one day a ship returned, not the same, not silent, not cruel. It came with no weapons, no lies, only a message and a seat, and they said the council wants her to join, not as a project, not as a tool, but as a voice. And Jera looked at Leo and at Maddie and said, "Not alone." She stepped into the ship with them by her side, and her mark glowing again, not as a wound, but as a symbol of every choice she made. And the ship lifted into the sky, not to take her away, but to carry her forward into the stars, into the unknown, into a future she would shape with her own hands. And down below the world watched, not in fear, but in pride, because one girl had taught them that even the broken, even the cast aside, even the forgotten could rise and lead and shine brighter than the stars.